is the epitome of all the things about which you're concerned. Well, says the person, that's pretty good. I never thought about those 4 things in that way. But still, you haven't told me anything about why he actually came. You say, well, I'm glad you're still with me. Let me try and turn to the positive side now. Let me give you 1 or 2 reasons as to why he did come. Number 1, he came to do his Father's will. John chapter 4 and verse 34, my food, said Jesus, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. John chapter 5 and verse 30, I seek not to please myself, says Jesus, but him who sent me. Why is this important? Well, it's important because people like to suggest that Jesus woke up one morning and somehow or another he'd been reading an old book that he found somewhere, and he found out that there was stuff in here about a Messiah, and so he decided maybe he'd try and become him. So we need to go to the Scriptures and say, well, let's see whether that kind of allegation is substantiated in the Bible. And when we go to the Bible, we discover that here is an individual who understands that the frame in which he's operating goes right back into eternity. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And this Word lived to fulfill his Father's purpose. Secondly, Jesus came to fulfill the Scriptures. This is another way of saying essentially the same thing. He was the one promised in the Old Testament. John chapter 6, and it's important to know the Gospel of John if we're going to speak meaningfully to our friends. John 6:14, after the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who's to come into the world. They saw the feeding of the 5,000. 5 loaves and 2 fish. Some little guy brings his lunch. Jesus takes it. He blesses it. He gives it to the disciples, and he says, now give it to the group. 5,000 men, plus the women, plus the children, and everybody's sitting there eating. And here all are fed, and when all is said and done, the disciples are dispatched with baskets to pick up everything that's left over, and they end up with a substantial amount that can be used later on. What in the world happened there? Nobody had food. A kid shows up. He's got a little sandwich lunch, and we're all eating. What happened there? And somebody says, I don't. This is a far out thought, but the only explanation I can give is this must be the prophet in here in the scroll. Maybe he came. Maybe that's him. John chapter 11, verse 27. Find the same kind of emphasis. Martha speaks to Jesus surrounding the death of her brother Lazarus. Jesus makes this profound statement concerning the resurrection. She says to him, verse 27, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was the one to come into the world. See, what we have to say to our friends is this. We're shut up to the evidence here. We're not fabricating this stuff. We recognize that we are speaking from this book, and we can have another day when we talk about the foundations of this book. But for now, here is the evidence that we're both agreeing upon, we're both looking at. Now look at John 11:27, and what is it saying there? It's saying that this Jesus of Nazareth not only came to fulfill his Father's will, but he came to fulfill the Old Testament Scriptures. And we would turn them to the portion with which we began in Luke chapter 4 and draw out for them the implications of this. By the time you get to the history book of the church in the Acts of the Apostles, you find the exact same thing taking place. Acts chapter 17, Paul's in Athens, multicultural society, idols everywhere, syncretism, pluralism. Guys are into all kinds of spiritual facets and cosmic consciousness and all kinds of schemes and dreams and notions and ideas. The Apostle Paul walks into Athens and he goes to the synagogue. And on 3 successive Sabbath days, he reasons with the people in the synagogue. Verse 3 of chapter 17 of the Acts. He reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Christ, he said. And some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and not a few prominent women, but the Jews were jealous and they started a riot. Listen, let me say to you again, dear ones, listen please. The time has long since passed in this country when you can simply go out and assume a level of biblical understanding on the parts of the people to whom we speak. Multiculturalism is not only embraced as an act of generosity on the part of the host nation, multiculturalism is embraced as an expression of truth. And growing up with that idea of not only blended natures and blended backgrounds, but blended notions of truth, it is increasingly difficult to engage the mind of a contemporary student in this country without we are armed and ready to reason with them from the Scriptures and to prove that Jesus is the Christ. Now, don't let's misunderstand this. We know that it is the Spirit of God who opens people's eyes. We know that it is the Spirit of God that illumines the minds of people, but that God has ordained that through your words and mine and our lives and our examples, we would be a means to that end. It's not infrequently that people will say to me, I had somebody stay with me in my home. She was 15 years old. We were reading the Bible together at night, and the girl said to me, this is the first time in all of my life that I have ever read one verse from the Bible. I do not know a thing about Jesus Christ. I do not know one thing about Christianity. Now, it is impossible to start with that girl on the basis of our traditional little cliches. Simply to say it clearer and a little louder is to say very little. We have to be able to come to the mind of the individual and to say, now come, let us reason together. Let us think this out. Let us see whether your ideas fit with the truth. He came then to do the Father's will. He came to fulfill the Scriptures. Thirdly, He came to make the Father known. He came to make the Father known. John 1:18, no one has ever seen God, but God the only Son who is at the Father's side has made Him known. Has made Him known. This is a great message of Christianity, you see. It is not that Christianity, along with all the religions of the world, is involved in some great cosmic search for deity and for God. That is a good starting point, and we want to start there with our friends in the bookstores. But there's an opportunity. They're not standing there by chance. There is none that seeketh after God, no, not one. And if they have an interest in spiritual things, we have an answer for their spiritual questions. And if we're not bold enough to address it and to say the reason that Jesus came was to make the Father known, then they will be left up the sidelines of all the literature that is available to them. I was listening on the radio this morning. Somebody was preaching a sermon, and in the course of the sermon, this individual says to the group, he says, and then by this means, he says, we will come to the fullness, the great fullness, which is the benefit of getting in touch with our own spirituality. And so I switched the radio off to think about that for a while, and also because I'd had enough of it. And I said to myself, what in the world does that mean? The great fullness which comes from getting in touch with our own spirituality. It's kind of high-sounding, isn't it? It appeals to some kind of pseudo-intellectual, visceral combination within us. It's sort of like Zen Buddhism or something. Saying, well, I'm getting in touch with my spirituality. Yeah, but what does that mean? Don't give me that in touch with your spirituality. Tell me what it means. I want to talk to you about it. I want to understand it. I want to find out about it. Tell me. And when we've listened, then we can talk. But until we've listened, we shouldn't be so quick to talk. But when we talk, we're going to tell him. The quest is not to somehow penetrate spirituality. The wonderful news is that in the baby, in the manger in Bethlehem, God, the creator of the universe, has invaded our time-space capsule, and He has come looking for us. And if you are really looking for Him, boy, do I have a story for you.
With Truth for Life, Alistair Begg's message is titled, Who is Jesus? We pray that your Christmas celebration is given meaning through this truth about Jesus. And perhaps you'll have a moment with friends or family in the next few days for significant conversations about why Jesus came. To own today's message on CD or as an audio download, go online to truthforlife.org. Look for the title, Who is Jesus, Part 3. Alistair?
Before our time is gone today, Let's spend a moment reflecting on the first Christmas. It's a most unlikely scene, isn't it? Who would imagine that God would descend upon earth in such humble conditions? Born to a young innocent virgin in an obscure village, lying in a makeshift cradle of all places. And who would ever imagine that this sweet innocent nativity scene would one day lead to the cross? After all, the Christmas story really becomes the Easter story. Verse 4 of Galatians 4 says, "But when the time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive the full rights of sons." This year, as we celebrate Christmas with friends and family, let's do so with all the reverence and respect Jesus deserves. Let's remember the innocent, pudgy hands of the baby Jesus lying in the manger would one day bear ugly scars, pierced with spikes driven into him by those who despised him. Jesus went to the cross in order to redeem sinners and to set our record straight. That, my friend, gives us every reason to celebrate Christmas and to do so with joy.
From all of us at Truth for Life, we want to extend our warmest Christmas greetings, hoping you'll enjoy a refreshing weekend with family and friends, celebrating the joy of Christmas together. I'm Bob Lepine, inviting you to join with us next week at the same time to hear Alistair Begg and Truth for Life, where the learning is for living.